The grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel gleamed with crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes raised in calculated celebration. Daniel Brooks walked through the service entrance in his gray janitor's uniform, mop bucket rolling quietly beside him. A spilled drink near the east corridor needed attention. Scattered glances followed him across the marble floor, and somewhere behind silk curtains, muffled laughter rippled through clusters of tailored suits. From across the room, Evelyn Carter stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes found him and held too long. The room kept laughing. No one knew that in minutes, every sound would die. The annual gala for Whitmore Industries represented everything the company wanted the world to see. 300 guests filled the ballroom, each one selected for their net worth, influence, or proximity to power. The executives who ran the company's various divisions stood in loose circles near the bar, their conversations punctuated by the kind of laughter that came from knowing you belonged. Daniel had worked for Whitmore Industries for 4 years, but he had never set foot in this room during an event. Tonight was different only because Marcus, the regular evening janitor, had called in sick, and someone needed to handle the mess a careless caterer had left near the service hallway. He moved efficiently, keeping his head down, his presence designed to be invisible, but invisibility was harder to maintain when you walked through the center of a room filled with people who measured human value in titles and tax brackets. A woman in a red dress glanced at him, then leaned toward her companion with a whispered comment that made them both smile. A group of men near the ice sculpture paused their conversation as he passed, their expressions shifting from indifference to something sharper. One of them was Victor Hale, the company's chief marketing officer, known throughout the building for his polished presentations and his unpolished opinions about anyone he considered beneath him. Victor watched Daniel cross the room, then turned to the men beside him. "Looks like housekeeping got lost," he said, just loud enough to carry. "Someone should tell him the service elevator is the other direction." The men laughed, the sound carrying across the polished floor like a verdict. Daniel heard it. He had heard versions of this his entire adult life. He did not react, did not slow his pace, did not give them the satisfaction of acknowledgement. He simply kept walking toward the east corridor, where the actual work waited. But as he neared the hallway, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, saw the name on the screen, and everything in his posture changed. He stepped into a quiet alcove near the service door and answered, his voice dropping to something soft and warm. "Hey, sweetheart, you should be asleep by now." The voice on the other end was small and bright, belonging to his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. She was calling from his sister's apartment across town, where she stayed on the nights Daniel worked late. She wanted to tell him about a drawing she had made that day. It was a picture of the two of them at the park, she explained, with a big yellow sun and a tree that looked like broccoli. Daniel laughed quietly, the sound genuine and unguarded. "A broccoli tree? That sounds perfect. You can show me tomorrow morning, okay? I'll make pancakes." He listened as she described the drawing in detail, her voice carrying the particular enthusiasm of childhood. When she finally said goodnight, he stayed in the alcove for a moment, phone still pressed to his ear, even though the line had gone silent. The hardness that had carried him through the ballroom was gone. In its place was something tender, something that revealed the man beneath the uniform. From 20 feet away, Evelyn Carter watched him. She had followed his path across the room not because she recognized him immediately, but because something about the way he moved seemed familiar. Now, seeing him speak to his daughter, seeing the way his entire demeanor transformed, she felt a crack forming in the carefully constructed evening. She knew that voice. She knew that gentleness. And she knew, with sudden and uncomfortable clarity, that this room full of powerful people had spent the last 10 minutes mocking someone whose worth exceeded most of theirs combined. She turned back to the executives around her, but their conversation had become noise. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, pulled backward through years she had tried to forget. It was 8 years ago, before Evelyn Carter had become Evelyn Carter, CEO of Whitmore Industries. Back then, she was just Evelyn, 24 years old, newly hired as a junior analyst, drowning in a job that demanded more than she knew how to give. Her father had died 6 months earlier, leaving behind debts she hadn't known existed, and a mother who needed care she couldn't afford. Evelyn worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and the desperate hope that if she just worked hard enough, everything would eventually be okay. It wasn't okay. The pressure built until it cracked her open, and one night, she found herself sitting on the floor of an empty conference room at 11 p.m., unable to stop crying. That was where Daniel found her. He was working the night shift then, cleaning offices after everyone had gone home. He had heard her through the door and knocked quietly, asking if she was all right. When she couldn't answer, he had simply sat down across from her, not too close, not intruding, just present. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer platitudes. He just sat with her in the silence until she could breathe again. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed often. Daniel seemed to have an instinct for when she was struggling, appearing with a cup of tea left on her desk or a quiet word of encouragement when the office was empty. He never overstepped, never presumed, but he listened when she needed to talk, and his steadiness became an anchor she didn't know she needed. One night, when she finally told him about her father, about the debts, about feeling like she was failing at everything that mattered, he had looked at her with an expression she had never forgotten. "You're not failing," he had said. "You're surviving. There's a difference." She never learned what happened to him after she got promoted and transferred to a different building. By the time she thought to look, he was gone, moved to another position or another shift. She told herself she would find him and thank him properly. She never did. Years passed. She climbed the corporate ladder with the same relentless determination that had gotten her through those early days. She became director, then vice president, then CEO. The young woman who had cried on the conference room floor became someone else entirely, someone who wore power like armor and rarely looked backward. Now, standing in this glittering ballroom, she was looking backward whether she wanted to or not. Daniel had finished his phone call and returned to his work, pushing the mop bucket toward the east corridor as if nothing had happened. He passed within 10 feet of her, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. She saw recognition flicker in his face, followed immediately by something that looked like deliberate blankness. He nodded politely, the way an employee nods to a CEO, and kept walking. He was pretending not to know her. The realization hit her like cold water. He remembered everything, and he had chosen to let her pretend she didn't. She stood frozen as he disappeared into the hallway, surrounded by people who saw only her title and her authority. None of them knew that the man they had just mocked was the reason she had survived long enough to become the person she was today. And he had walked past her without a word, offering her the same kindness he always had, the freedom to be who she needed to be, without obligation. The ballroom's energy shifted as the evening progressed. Champagne flowed more freely, voices grew louder, and the careful social performances of the early hours gave way to something raw. Near the center of the room, a cluster of executives had grown bolder in their entertainment, their conversation turning toward the kind of cruelty that masquerades as humor when there's enough alcohol and status involved. Victor Hale stood at the center of this group, his fourth glass of bourbon giving his voice an edge that cut through the ambient noise. He had been holding court for the past 20 minutes, telling stories about the various employees he had encountered over the years, each anecdote designed to position himself as clever and others as pitiable. His audience laughed at the appropriate moments, their complicity ensuring their place in his good graces. When Daniel emerged from the east corridor, having finished cleaning the spilled drink, Victor's attention locked onto him like a predator spotting movement. "Speaking of which," Victor said, his voice carrying clearly across the nearby tables, "here comes our friend from earlier, the one who got lost on his way to the basement." A few people chuckled nervously. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Victor was powerful, and power created its own gravity. Daniel tried to move past them, but Victor stepped into his path, champagne glass raised in mock salute. Hold on. Let me get a good look at you." He made a show of examining Daniel's uniform, the name tag on his chest, the worn shoes that had seen years of honest work. "Daniel Brooks, maintenance. Tell me, Daniel, how long have you been with the company?" Daniel's voice was even when he answered. 4 years. Victor nodded slowly, performing thoughtfulness. 4 years. "And in 4 years, what exactly have you accomplished? Besides, keeping our toilets clean?" The laughter that followed was louder now, more confident. The audience had permission to participate, and they took it. Someone made a comment about Daniel's salary. Another suggested he must have peaked early in life. A woman whose jewelry probably cost more than Daniel earned in a year looked at him with exaggerated pity. "It must be hard," she said, "knowing this is as far as you'll ever go." Daniel stood in the center of their attention, his face carefully neutral. He had learned long ago that reaction was what people like this wanted, that any sign of hurt or anger would only fuel their pleasure. So he gave them nothing, absorbing their words like stone absorbs rain. But inside, something different was happening. He was thinking about Lily, about the drawing she had made today, about the pancakes he had promised her tomorrow morning. He was thinking about the life he had built after his wife's death 3 years ago, the small apartment that was always clean, the bedtime stories he never missed, the way his daughter looked at him like he was the whole world. These people could say whatever they wanted. They could never touch what actually mattered. Victor was still talking, warming to his theme. "You know what I love about people like you? You're a perfect example of what happens when you don't have ambition. When you just accept your lot in life. It's almost admirable, really, how content you are being nothing." The word hung in the air. Nothing. It was meant to be the final blow, the decisive humiliation. The executives around Victor were already laughing, already moving on to the next entertainment. But from across the room, someone else had heard every word. Evelyn had been watching from the moment Victor called out to Daniel. She had seen the way the circle formed around him, predatory and amused. She had watched him stand there, alone, absorbing abuse from people who would never know a fraction of his courage. And she had felt something shift inside her, something that had been dormant for years. She was the CEO of this company. These were her employees, her guests, her responsibility. And she had spent 8 years building a career on the foundation that Daniel had helped her create, while he worked night shifts and cleaned floors and raised his daughter alone. She had watched him walk past her earlier tonight without asking for anything, without leveraging their history, without expecting her to acknowledge what he had done for her. And now these people, these small, cruel people, were calling him nothing. The champagne glass felt suddenly heavy in her hand. Her heart was pounding in a way it hadn't since those desperate early days. She knew what she should do. She should walk over there, pull rank, end this quietly. That was the CEO move, the professional move. But there was another move, one that had been building inside her for 8 years, one that had nothing to do with being a CEO and everything to do with being human. Evelyn set down her glass and began walking toward the crowd. The circle of executives noticed Evelyn's approach before Daniel did. Conversations faltered, postures straightened, and Victor Hale's smirk flickered uncertainly as his CEO moved toward them with a purpose that didn't match her usual diplomatic glide. She walked through the crowd without stopping, without greeting anyone, her eyes fixed on the man standing alone in the center of their mockery. When she reached Daniel, she didn't speak immediately. She stopped beside him, close enough that her shoulder almost touched his, and turned to face the executives who had been entertaining themselves at his expense. The ballroom had grown quiet. 300 pairs of eyes were now watching, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Victor recovered first, his smile returning with practiced ease. "Evelyn, perfect timing. We were just getting to know your maintenance staff. Really fascinating glimpse into the working class perspective." He waited for her to laugh, to join the joke, to give him permission to continue. She didn't. Instead, she looked at Daniel. Really looked at him, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do earlier. He was watching her with an expression she remembered from 8 years ago, steady and patient, giving her space to do whatever she needed to do. He had no expectation in his eyes, no demand, just quiet acceptance of whatever came next. She turned back to Victor and the assembled executives. Her voice, when she spoke, carried across the silent ballroom with perfect clarity. "This man," she said, "is not your entertainment. He is not an example of failure. He is not nothing." She paused, feeling the weight of what she was about to say, the doors it would open and close forever. "This man is my husband." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when reality shifts beneath your feet, when everything you thought you knew is suddenly wrong. Victor's face went through a rapid series of expressions, disbelief to confusion to something approaching fear. The woman who had pitied Daniel's limited potential looked like she might be sick. Across the room, phones emerged from pockets, and Evelyn knew that by tomorrow, this moment would be everywhere. But she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Daniel, whose expression had finally changed. He wasn't shocked by the revelation, she realized. He was shocked that she had made it. After 8 years of silence, after watching him pretend not to know her, after building her entire career on the appearance of being exactly what these executives expected, she had just burned it all down with 4 words. "Evelyn," he said, quietly, and there was a question in the way he said her name. She answered it by taking his hand. Not for the cameras, not for the executives, not for anyone but him. "I should have said it years ago," she told him, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I should have never let you walk away." Daniel's fingers tightened around hers. He understood what this was costing her, what she was risking by standing here with him in front of everyone who mattered to her career. And he understood something else too, something that changed everything. She hadn't said it to save him from embarrassment. She had said it because she meant it. The ballroom remained frozen, 300 people trying to process what they had just witnessed. Evelyn Carter, the youngest CEO in Whitmore Industries history, the woman who had built her reputation on flawless professionalism and strategic brilliance, had just claimed the janitor as her husband. And the janitor was looking at her like she had given him something more valuable than any title or salary or corner office. He was looking at her like she had given him herself. The aftermath came in waves. The first wave was immediate, the murmur that swept through the ballroom as Evelyn led Daniel away from the crowd, her hand still in his, her head held high. The second wave was digital, a cascade of texts and social media posts that would dominate the news cycle for days. But the wave that mattered most came later, in the quiet hours after the gala ended, when Evelyn and Daniel finally found themselves alone in her office on the 40th floor. The city spread out below them, lights glittering against the darkness. Evelyn stood at the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Daniel sat in one of the leather chairs across from her desk, watching her the way he had watched her 8 years ago, with patience and without judgment. Neither of them had spoken since leaving the ballroom. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that." Evelyn turned from the window. "Yes, I did. People are going to talk. The board, the shareholders, everyone." He paused. "Your career could be affected." "I know." She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. "Daniel, why did you pretend not to know me? Earlier, when you walked past, you could have said something." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because you built something real and important, and I didn't want to be the thing that complicated it." He looked at his hands, calloused from years of work. "When Sarah died, when I had to figure out how to raise Lily alone, I let go of a lot of things. Ambition, pride, the idea that I needed to be something impressive, but I never let go of what happened between us. I just put it somewhere safe, somewhere it couldn't hurt either of us." Evelyn sat down in the chair beside him. You saved me. Back then. You know that, don't you? I was drowning, and you just sat there with me until I could breathe again. I've thought about it every day since. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. I just kept you company while you did it. She shook her head, emotion tightening her throat. That's not true, and even if it were, you deserved better than me pretending you didn't exist. I was a coward. For 8 years, I was a coward. Daniel reached over and took her hand, the same way she had taken his in the ballroom. You weren't a coward. You were surviving. There's a difference. You taught me that. Evelyn laughed, a small sound that was half sob. I taught you? I was quoting you. Were you? He smiled, and for a moment, the years between them collapsed. I don't remember being that wise. The word husband hung unspoken between them. Evelyn hadn't been lying to the ballroom, but the full truth was more complicated. They had been married quietly, privately, in a small ceremony 2 years ago, after reconnecting by chance at a coffee shop near Lily's school. They had kept it secret for reasons that seemed rational at the time, protecting their careers, protecting Lily, protecting each other from the scrutiny that would inevitably come. But secrets have weight, and this one had grown heavier with each passing month. What happens now? Daniel asked. Evelyn squeezed his hand. Now, we stop hiding. Now, I stop being ashamed of the best thing that ever happened to me. The board meeting happened 3 days later. Evelyn sat at the head of the long conference table, facing 12 men and women who controlled billions of dollars in assets. The mood was tense, the air thick with unasked questions and unspoken judgments. Word of the gala had spread exactly as predicted, and the directors had convened this emergency session to discuss concerns about leadership stability. Robert Chen, the chairman, led the discussion. He was 70 years old, a veteran of corporate warfare who had survived 3 recessions and countless leadership transitions. He looked at Evelyn with an expression that mixed respect with disappointment. You understand our position, he said. The company's image is everything in our industry, and the image of our CEO being married to a maintenance worker creates complications. Evelyn's voice was even. Daniel is not a complication. He's my husband, which is precisely the problem. This came from Margaret Wu, a director known for her bluntness. You've built a brand around being a certain kind of leader. Polished, professional, exclusive. This undermines all of that, does it? Or does it just reveal that leadership and humanity aren't mutually exclusive? The discussion continued for 2 hours. Some directors expressed support for Evelyn, citing her track record and the company's strong performance under her leadership. Others worried about shareholder reactions, stock prices, the intangible but powerful force of public perception. Through it all, Evelyn remained calm, making her case without apology or defensiveness. When she returned home that evening, she found Daniel waiting in their apartment with dinner already prepared. Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked through a math problem. The scene was so ordinary, so domestic, that Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. How did it go? Daniel asked, keeping his voice light for Lily's sake. They want me to resign. Daniel's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. And what do you want? Before she could answer, Lily looked up from her homework. Mommy, can you help me with this one? It's really hard. Evelyn walked to the table and sat beside her stepdaughter, looking at the problem that seemed so difficult from a 7-year-old's perspective. It was simple addition, something that would be effortless in a few years. But right now, in this moment, it was Lily's whole world. Let me show you a trick, Evelyn said, and began to explain. Later, after Lily was asleep, Evelyn and Daniel sat together on the couch. The board's ultimatum hung over them like a storm cloud, but neither seemed willing to address it directly. Daniel spoke first. I could leave. Not us, just the situation. If I resigned from the company, found work somewhere else, maybe the pressure would ease. Evelyn shook her head immediately. No, absolutely not. Evelyn, be practical. Your career is everything you've worked for. My career is not everything. She turned to face him fully. For years, I thought it was. I thought if I just climbed high enough, achieved enough, the hollow feeling would go away. It didn't. You know what made it go away? Coming home to you and Lily, watching you make pancakes on Saturday morning, hearing her call me mommy for the first time. Her voice broke slightly. I spent 8 years being afraid of this exact situation, afraid that if people knew who I really was, who I really loved, they would take everything from me. But everything they could take isn't worth keeping, not if it means losing this. Daniel pulled her close, holding her the way he had learned to hold her over the past 2 years, with firmness and tenderness in equal measure. You're not going to lose this. Whatever happens, I know. She rested her head against his shoulder. Because I'm not giving it up. The board can do whatever they want, but I'm done being ashamed. The following morning, Evelyn called an all-hands meeting. Every employee of Whitmore Industries who could attend gathered in the main auditorium. Those who couldn't attend watched via video link. The room was packed, buzzing with speculation about what the CEO would say. She walked onto the stage alone, without notes or teleprompter. For a long moment, she simply looked at the assembled faces, seeing not employees but human beings with their own stories, their own struggles, their own quiet heroisms. 6 days ago, she began, I stood in a ballroom and said 4 words that changed everything. I told a room full of executives that the man they were mocking was my husband, and since then, I've been asked repeatedly to explain myself, to justify my choices, to apologize for loving someone whose job title doesn't match mine. She paused, letting the silence build. I'm not going to apologize, but I am going to explain. Not because I owe anyone an explanation, but because I think this company needs to hear it. She told them about meeting Daniel 8 years ago, about crying on the floor of a conference room and finding kindness where she expected judgment, about the way he had helped her survive without ever asking for anything in return. She told them about reconnecting, about falling in love, about Lily and pancakes and homework help, and she told them about the moment in the ballroom when she realized that being silent was no longer something she could live with. There are people in this room, she continued, who clean the floors and empty the trash and fix the things that break. There are people who answer phones and schedule meetings and make sure the coffee is fresh. There are people whose names will never appear in a press release, whose work will never be celebrated at a gala, whose contributions to this company are invisible to everyone except the people who depend on them. She looked directly at the camera, knowing Daniel was watching from somewhere in the building. Those people are not less valuable. They are not less worthy of respect. They are the foundation that everything else is built upon. And if the price of remembering that is my position as CEO, then I will pay it gladly. The auditorium was silent for a moment. Then someone near the back started clapping. Then someone else. Within seconds, the room had erupted into applause that seemed to shake the walls. Evelyn stepped away from the microphone, her eyes scanning the crowd until she found what she was looking for. Daniel stood near the back, still in his maintenance uniform, applauding with everyone else, but his eyes were only for her, and in them she saw something that made the rest of the room fade away. Pride. Not in her position or her power, but in her courage. She walked off the stage and through the crowd, not toward the exit where her security team waited, but toward the back of the auditorium, toward the man in the gray uniform. When she reached him, she didn't hesitate. She kissed him, right there, in front of every employee of Whitmore Industries. The applause doubled. The board met again that afternoon. Robert Chen called Evelyn personally to deliver their decision. The emergency session had been canceled. Her position as CEO was secure. Several directors had received calls from major shareholders expressing support, and the company's stock had actually risen following the all-hands meeting. It turned out that authenticity was good for business. But the more significant changes happened slowly in the weeks and months that followed. Victor Hale resigned, officially to pursue other opportunities, though everyone knew the real reason. The woman who had pitied Daniel's limited potential found herself transferred to a satellite office in a city she'd never wanted to visit. The executives who had laughed loudest discovered that their laughter had not been forgotten, and that promotions they had expected mysteriously failed to materialize. Daniel was offered a management position in the facilities department. He declined, preferring to continue the work he had always done, but he did so now with a respect that had never been extended before. People greeted him by name in the hallways. New employees were told his story as part of their orientation. He became, in a strange way, a symbol of what the company wanted to be. A place where your job title didn't define your worth. None of this was revenge. Daniel held no grudges against those who had mocked him. When asked about Victor Hale or the others, he simply shrugged and said that people are usually fighting battles you can't see. It was this grace, more than anything else, that completed his transformation in the eyes of those who had once dismissed him. You could argue with power, but it was hard to argue with forgiveness. The first Christmas after the gala, Evelyn and Daniel hosted a gathering at their apartment. It wasn't a party for executives or shareholders. It was a dinner for the people who worked the night shifts and early mornings. The janitors and security guards and cafeteria workers who had known Daniel for years. Lily helped set the table, carefully placing name cards she had made herself at each seat. When the guests arrived, Evelyn greeted them at the door, not as a CEO, but as a host, as Daniel's wife, as part of a community she was only beginning to understand. She watched as her husband moved through the room, laughing and talking with people whose names she was just learning. These were the people who had shown him kindness during the years she had been absent, who had attended his wife's funeral and helped him navigate single fatherhood and treated him like family when he had none. She understood, watching them, that Daniel had never been alone. He had simply been surrounded by people whose friendship didn't require status or recognition. And now, because of him, she was part of that too. After dinner, when the guests had gone and Lily was asleep, Evelyn and Daniel stood together at the window, looking out at the city lights. It was almost exactly 1 year since the gala, since the moment everything changed. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked. "Standing up for me that night?" Evelyn considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret every day I didn't. Every time I walked past you pretending we didn't know each other. Every moment I chose my image over you." She turned to face him. "But that night, I would do it again in a heartbeat." Daniel smiled, the same quiet smile that had carried her through her darkest moments 8 years ago. "You know what I've learned? Respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn, but not by being powerful." He touched her face gently. "By being kind. By seeing people. By standing up when standing up is hard." Evelyn leaned into his hand. "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been this wise. You just weren't paying attention." She laughed, the sound light and free in a way she hadn't felt in years. Outside the window, the city continued its endless motion, millions of lives intersecting and separating, each one carrying its own weight and worth. But in this room, in this moment, there was only this. 2 people who had found each other across impossible distances, who had chosen each other against impossible odds, and who had proven, in their quiet way, that the loudest statement isn't made with words. It's made with respect, with courage, with love, and sometimes with 4 words spoken in a silent room. "That's my husband."